Welcome in, everybody. Wednesday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. So we got ourselves a very special episode of the Aaron Torres Pod here on a Wednesday evening. So if you're on social media, you follow your favorite teams, you know that it was a little bit of an important day in college hoops. The SEC officially dropped home and road opponents for the upcoming season. In other words, everybody now knows officially who they will play, where they will play, even if we don't have exact dates yet. But it was an important day, right? We find out that Florida will play Kentucky twice after they didn't last year. Alabama will play Tennessee twice after they didn't last year. Of course, Arkansas and Kentucky will only play once, which was a gripe that we talked about last week. Well, here's the deal. Rather than just me talking about it, we're bringing on, how about this? This is going to be really fun. Garth Glissman is the associate commissioner in the SEC specifically for basketball. So he is basically the brains behind this basketball schedule. How did we get a situation where we now get Kentucky and Florida twice after not getting it last year? Why don't we have Kentucky and Arkansas twice? But why do we also have Arkansas and Auburn twice? How does the schedule come together? How are opponents picked? How important is history, rivalries, but also how good you are? We talk about all of it with Garth Glissman. So I think this is going to be a really fun interview for you. It was certainly educational for me as I learned an awful lot about how these schedules come together. By the way, we talked a little bit about the exhibition games, out of conference scheduling. Just a really, really fun interview for a college basketball nerd, especially in June when it's a little bit slower time of year. Before we get started, a couple quick things. One, housekeeping note. As of Thursday morning, I'm officially on vacation for about 10 days, okay? So next week, after this Garth Glissman interview, we'll do a bunch of college hoops offseason grades. We'll start Thursday night into Friday with Kentucky. And then from there, over the next week or so, we'll do BYU, Duke, Arkansas, St. John's. So this is what I need you to do. One, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. YouTube videos every single day, even when I'm on vacation. We don't slow down. Also, make sure you're subscribed on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. By the way, for those of you who are craving football, ready to turn the page, I promise, as we get back from vacation early July into media days, I promise that we are going to have plenty to talk about from the football side. We'll start making our preseason predictions, over-under win totals. You know, there's some hot seat stuff with Mark Stoops at Kentucky, with Sam Pittman at Arkansas. So there is plenty to discuss. Finally, before we get to Garth Glissman, one more thing. I do want to thank our friends. Do want to thank our partners. You already know who I want to thank. I want to thank Cauley Puffs and CauleyPuffs.com. Okay, so I've told you Cauley Puffs' story, but family-owned company, not far from where I live. Joey, a huge sports fan, was sitting on the couch one day watching games, and he said, I need a snack that is both healthy but delicious, something I'm going to love, something my kids are going to love, something I can enjoy without feeling guilty while watching all the big games. He came up with Cauley Puffs. Baked, not fried, avocado oil, no grease, healthy ingredients. But the best part is they taste delicious. At this point, you don't even need to take my word for it. Try them for yourself. And here's a cool thing. Over the last couple of days, the Cauley Puffs people have reached out to me and said, Torres, you are doing such a good job. So many of your listeners love our product. We're going to give you a special promo code just for your show. So if you're a listener of the Aaron Torres Pod, and you obviously are because you're hearing this right now, all you got to do, go to CauleyPuffs.com. Throw as many or as few Cauley Puffs as you want in your cart. Use promo code Torres at checkout. That's Torres. CauleyPuffs.com, Torres at checkout. You get 15% off your total purchase. CauleyPuffs.com. Use code Torres at checkout. Appreciate your support. Appreciate everything you do. Now let's get to SEC Associate Commissioner Garth Glissman. Joining me via Zoom. It is Wednesday. SEC basketball schedule's basically out. We got our opponents. We got our matchups. Here to talk about it all from the SEC offices, Associate Commissioner for Basketball, Garth Glissman. Garth, listen, man, it's always a busy time for the SEC. I don't think you guys really take any days off. But, I appreciate you joining us. I appreciate you informing everybody, including me, a little bit about how this basketball schedule comes together and really just everything going on around the offices. But I appreciate you. How you doing?
Good. Aaron, thank you for your interest in SEC basketball. I enjoy following you on X and your commentary on SEC men's basketball is appreciated. And so appreciate the invite and excited to be with you today. Talk a little bit about our schedule and the thought process that goes into it.
I probably care more about SEC basketball than I don't want to say anybody, but in the media, first of all, let me say this. So you came from outside the SEC. You've been there about 2 years, from my understanding. I am so, and I actually talked to Commissioner Sankey about this at the Final Four, but the growth of that league on the basketball side, we're in the middle of the College Baseball World Series. The SEC has been great in baseball forever, football forever, gymnastics forever. This basketball thing has been so cool to watch kind of organically. And I talked to Greg Sankey, Coach Commissioner Sankey, about the evolution of this from the start of the SEC network, the investment in the schools. But coming into the league 2 years ago, it was already an ascending rocket ship. And here we are in a summer where not only does the SEC have the reigning national champion, but 14 teams in that league. I lost track of how many ended up in the Sweet 16, but it was like seven. I mean, it was a historic season. Just, you have a job to do, but how fun has it been to watch this league grow and evolve on the basketball side?
The exciting part of my job is that within this iconic conference that is the SEC, men's basketball still represents an enormous growth opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And last year, statistically, was the best season for any conference in college basketball history. So I'm not suggesting that we expect to replicate the historical dominance on a year-to-year basis, but I think we're just beginning to showcase our potential in men's basketball. We've got a long road, runway ahead. And, our challenge is to chase the standards set by other SEC sports, of course, most notably football. So a lot of success last season, but really since I got back from the Final Four, we've been focused on the coming season, and there's a lot to be excited about in the future. We still have that, that underdog chip on our shoulder, and still feel like we have a lot to prove in the years to come.
So outside of setting a record for most teams ever in an NCAA tournament, and of course having the defending champs, you say there's still a lot of room to grow. Like, what are some big picture goals for the league or for individual school? Like how do you continue to grow off of what was already a historically great season?
Last season was the first national championship for the SEC since 2012, when Kentucky won it. And we'd like to compete and win national championships more frequently than that. The standard in the SEC is national championships. We were not only the highest rated conference in the country last year, according to KenPom, we were the highest rated conference in the history of KenPom, which dates back to the mid 1990s. And so our expectation going forward is we want to be the best conference in college basketball on an annual basis. We want to compete for national championships on an annual basis. And last year we showed that's possible. And starting next season, we need to be able to sustain that level of dominance. And I think that's the next challenge is sustained dominance and doing it year after year. Again, not to suggest that, the statistics from last year that you rattled off, we won 89% of non-conference games.
Yes.
We had 14 of our 16 schools ranked in the top 25 at one point in the season. 14 of 16 schools made the NCAA tournament. That's 87.5% of the league. The records continued to fall in the tournament. 7 teams made the Sweet 16. That's an all-time record. We won 23 games in total. That's also an all-time record. So I'm not suggesting that, we expect to replicate those types of statistics and surpass them year after year. I mean, at a certain point, it becomes statistically impossible. But I think we have captured the attention of college basketball fans nationwide, and we want to be the best conference in college basketball on an annual basis, and that's the standard that we set last year, and it's our job to keep that going now moving forward.
Yeah, it was funny being a commentator in this space last year. You get to the NCAA tournament, you see 14 teams, and of course, people from outside the league. And I don't work for the league or anything, but 14. And then it's like, Well, look at who they beat in the out of conference. I just off the top of my head, Texas A&M beats Purdue and Indiana. Georgia beats St. John's, who had an incredible year, and that's on top of the Kentuckys and the Alabamas and whoever's the Auburn, who of course had like a historically great out of conference. So it was an incredible season. Let's start to look ahead, and obviously we found out today the opponents, for everybody who's playing who and where. And let's get to the one of the reasons you're here. I mean, I want to talk to you about a lot of things, but this all kind of started because there was a report last week, knowing that the schedules were going to come out, that for a second straight year, the John Calipari Arkansas matchup against Kentucky, his former school, would be a one-off affair. One thing about me, I try to be respectful of everybody, but I share my opinions, and sometimes they come off rude or abrasive, and I hope it didn't seem that way. But that was what seemed to be the headline out of this SEC schedule. Is you have a Hall of Fame coach, his coaching in a league with a school that he was at for 15 years. They only played once last year. It was one of the very memorable moments of the league slate. So I'll just ask you, it's a question that I know Kentucky fans are asking, Arkansas fans are asking, and of course, plenty of fans that have no particular rooting interest. How do you end up with a schedule with just Arkansas and Kentucky just once?
Well, first of all, let me acknowledge that it's a fair criticism, and that Arkansas and Kentucky will only play once a season. We had a nice exchange on X about it. I heard the same criticism from some of my closest friends. So it's absolutely a fair criticism. I will tell you that a lot goes into our schedule, and we're very happy with how we landed overall. How we landed where we did requires some explanation.
Let's do it.
And just at a foundational level, the way we think about scheduling is it's a delicate balance in that fans want big games and traditional rivalries, but fans also want their teams to be treated fairly.
Sure.
And so in the SEC, our schedule does both. Delivering big games is straightforward. That's not where I make my money, so to speak. But ensuring that the schedule is fair for all 16 teams does require more nuance. And fairness not only relates to the schedule within that season, but also fairness from year to year. With respect to factors such as how difficult games are distributed, whether you're opening at home or on the road, home and away designations within a particular season, home and away designations relative to another opponent over the course of multiple seasons. So we take all of those considerations into account and ultimately try to strike the best possible balance. To take your question about the Arkansas-Kentucky game head on, we certainly recognize that is a big game, given Coach Calipari's history at Kentucky. I mentioned that prior to this season, when Florida won the national championship, Kentucky had the most recent national championship. That was Coach Calipari's 2012 team. And I should note that last season, Coach Calipari's return to Rupp Arena was the centerpiece of our TV strategy last season. And I say that because as the football season's footprint continues to grow, college basketball and the football season, both the NFL and the college football playoff continues to grow. So college basketball season needs to be more mindful about where you position big games. So last year, we positioned Coach Calipari's return to Rupp Arena, a primetime game on Saturday night, got the full big game treatment from ESPN. And it was the weekend in between the NFC, AFC championships. Then there's a week off, and then the Super Bowl. And so it was a primetime game in the first weekend of many where there were no NFL games to compete with. And I thought ESPN really blew that out. Just incredible storylines associated with that game. Now, it turned out to be the fifth most watched game of the SEC regular season. And I think that's an important fact because that's a big game. But it's not like that game was orders of magnitude better than other high-profile SEC games. If it was, in fact, orders of magnitude, a 2x or 3x more than any other game on our schedule, then we may have landed in a different place this season. I will acknowledge that. But he's made his return once to Rupp Arena, and then you have to acknowledge, does the second and third and so on trip back, do you start to have some diminishing returns at some point in terms of the overall excitement around the game, especially considering that we have other rivalries that we want to feature in our conference. So one of the exciting aspects of the SEC is that we've grown in recent years. So after my first year, we went from 14 to 16 schools. We went from 14 to 16 schools, but decided to continue to play an 18-game conference schedule. And so by definition, that means SEC matchups that have happened throughout history are happening less frequently than before, because you have more teams, same number of games, and the math just doesn't add up the way that it used to. So to be specific, last season marked the first time in 60 years that Florida and Kentucky only played once during the regular season.
Wow.
And I understand why that happened. Because of conference expansion in the era of super conferences, there's certain rivalries that came to fruition when conferences were smaller, and they're not going to happen with the same amount of frequency. And so that's how we ended up in a scenario where Florida, Kentucky, after 6 years of playing, 60 years of playing home and away, only played once last year. But it's still difficult to see a 60-year streak broken.
Let me jump in on that.
We heard from fans last year,
Yeah,
how can this possibly happen? And of course, the same structure was in place last year, where in the SEC, the way that it works is every school plays all 15 other schools once. So that gets you to 5 games. And then you play 3 schools twice, which gets you to 18 regular season games. And the math was such that we also have, to honor traditional rivalries, each school has 2 permanent 2-play opponents. So for Kentucky, those permanent 2-play opponents, and that's written into conference bylaws.
Yeah.
It's Tennessee and Vanderbilt. For Florida, it's Georgia and South Carolina. So you talk about some of these high-profile matchups. You mentioned Kentucky, Arkansas. Obviously, the Florida fans were disappointed. Florida and Kentucky fans were disappointed when that 60-year streak snapped. For the first time in 60 years, Florida fans didn't get to see Kentucky in their building last year. So those are all the different considerations that we're trying to balance. The same is true for Alabama, Tennessee. They only played once last year, and it was the first time in 60 years that happened. So I understand the why behind that, but it's still hard for fans to process, especially if you're Florida, who doesn't get to see Kentucky come into your building, and last year Alabama didn't get to see Tennessee come into their building. So this year, with that 18th game where the conference office has some flexibility, because fans, they might think, oh, it's an 18-game schedule, surely you can make it work. But once you've made a decision as a conference to play everybody once, that's you to 15. And then we made a decision to play certain schools twice, 2 schools twice on a mandatory basis each year. That gets you to 17. That only leaves the conference office with 1 game, the 18th game, to spread around and try to honor these rivalries to the extent possible. So
let me ask you a question.
Real quick. So this year was, we decided to lean into Florida, Kentucky.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
And lean into Alabama, Tennessee. So those were games last year. They only happened once. First time that's happened in 60 years. And so we're leaning into that and addressing that this year. And so we ended up with those 2-play matchups. And with Arkansas, their 2-play matchup is Auburn, which is another high-profile 2-play matchup. We think both teams are going to be at or near the top of the conference again next year, have the potential to go a long ways in the NCAA tournament. So it's a high-profile matchup, but maybe not the one that some fans were expecting given Coach Cal's history at Kentucky.
Yeah, I think no matter what you do, listen, you're never going to make everybody happy with no matter what you do. How much? So you basically, long story short, you basically have one game that kind of, as the bylaws are written, is basically fluid right now. So you play everybody once. There's 2 teams you're always going to play twice. In the case of Kentucky, it's Vandy and Tennessee. In the case of Arkansas, we're just using them as hypotheticals. It's Missouri and Texas. How much goes into like putting on good games versus trying to maintain those regional and historic rivals? And so, like, I'll give you an example, right? So, like, Florida, Kentucky played every year for 60 years twice. They only played once last year. But Florida also is the defending champ. Kentucky is perceived by some to be the SEC favorite. Like, if Mississippi State, like we know how big of the brand, quote unquote, Kentucky is. If Mississippi State was the hypothetical defending champ, would they have been given like, would we want to maybe more match them up with a Kentucky type program or whoever? Like, in other words, how much does Florida being the reigning champ help the argument of like, oh, yeah, we could get them back on Kentucky's schedule twice? Because it's not only a historic rivalry that historically has been played twice, but it's also a game that like casual fans that aren't fans of either school are probably going to want to watch next year.
Well, Florida winning the national championship didn't hurt their cause.
Sure.
I'll say that. So with respect to the discretionary two-play matchups, we're really trying to accomplish two things. One, we're trying to match up similarly situated programs to the extent possible. So what I messaged to our head coaches at our spring meetings to help them understand what they would see when they got their home and away designations this year is that you can expect your discretionary two-play opponent to be a team that has a similar profile as you based on your results last season and preseason projections looking into next year. So in the case of Florida and Kentucky, all of those factors align because certainly Florida deserves to be rewarded after last season. If you look at a lot of the preseason polls, I think it's fair to say that in the aggregate, Florida and Kentucky, if you were to average everything out currently, would be 1 and 2 looking ahead to next year. In those polls where Florida and Kentucky aren't 1 and 2, Arkansas would probably factor in there. They're certainly high in many preseason projections. So we're trying to match up similarly situated programs, which does help serve some business considerations, helps generate fan interest. There's also some competitive considerations that go into that in the sense that you're matching up your best teams, trying to create some separation at the top. The second consideration that we take into account is, to the extent possible, if there's a rivalry that doesn't already fit into our mandatory two-play matchups, we will try to honor traditional rivalries with that discretionary two-play matchup. So an example of that is Oklahoma and Texas A&M. So Oklahoma and Texas A&M for each of the last 2 years have been discretionary two-play opponents. And I'm actually a former Big 12 student athlete, originally from Nebraska, went to my state institution. And Oklahoma, Texas A&M were original members of the Big 12. So there's some history there. So to answer your question, Aaron, it really is a combination. That's why I mentioned, and this is a concept that I learned at the NBA, so much of league office, conference office work, it's striking the appropriate balance. It's trying to deliver big games, trying to deliver traditional rivalries while also ensuring fairness across the 16 teams in the SEC. So it's the balance of matching up similarly situated programs so that we can optimize the number of big games next season on the SEC schedule and honoring those traditional rivalries, which also help increase fan interest. So that's how we think about it. It's never one factor that typically leads to a scheduling outcome. It really is a balance of a handful of important considerations.
So when you're looking at teams, obviously this time of year, it's all projections. It doesn't matter whose it is. You know, you're just it's mine, it's ESPN's, it's CBS, whatever. I guess the point that I'm trying to get to is, how do you actually put together dates, right? Because I was thinking about this, is that like it would feel to me that you want some games that you presume will be marquee early in the conference schedule to get people excited for the season ahead. But you also, I would assume, want to pseudo backlog some games too, because as you said, we all love football. I talk football all the time, but the college football calendar is now going into late January. The NFL calendar, of course, goes into early February. And so it feels like you want to let everybody know, hey, SEC basketball is here. We got some awesome teams in early to mid-January, but you also kind of want to ramp up into the SEC tournament, into the NCAA tournament. How do you find that balance? And again, nobody really knows who's going to be good, but you kind of have an idea of who you expect to be good. How do you find that balance of like, okay, we want these couple marquee games early, let the world know SEC basketball has arrived. It's awesome. This season's going to be great. But then the counter to that is you want a couple big games late to get everybody fired up for the beginning of March.
Well, I feel like you may have read my notes in terms
No,
of how we think about
swear.
structuring our
No,
schedule.
no.
You said it very well. We do want to start the conference season off with a bang, but you're also right, Aaron, that viewership in college basketball picks up after the football season concludes. And there's kind of a stair-step approach in the sense that we see a ratings uptick after the college football season is over, which is understandable because a lot of your college sports fans are going to transition from one sport to the next. And then we see another stair-step up in terms of ratings after the NFL season concludes. So where that leads you is the back half of college basketball season is from a viewership standpoint where you're going to see the largest numbers. Now, I'm also a believer in cultivating interest throughout the season, beginning in non-conference play.
No doubt.
So that you're building up towards something at the end of the season. So last year, in addition to our historic on-court success, the SEC was the most watched conference in college basketball during the regular season and the NCAA tournament. Viewership for the SEC Conference Championship game was up 74% from the prior year.
Wow.
The Auburn-Alabama game on February 15th, after football season was over, was not only the first 1 versus 2 matchup in SEC men's basketball history, it was also the most watched SEC regular season game since 2019.
Oof.
So all of those trends are consistent with your view that, okay, you want to create some interest early, but the biggest numbers from a viewership standpoint are going to come later in the basketball season after football is over. But when you look at viewership of SEC men's basketball last season, there's no doubt that some of the interest that was generated early, not only in terms of some of the non-conference wins, but all of the positive goodwill that the conference generated from its dominant non-conference performance. We had some high-profile games early. In fact, Florida, Kentucky last year, they only played one.
That was all you, wasn't it? You knew Florida was going to be undefeated and Kentucky was going to be awesome. You could take a victory lap on that one. That game was awesome.
It was opening day of SEC play.
I remember.
And we knew that would be a big game, and that was one of the reasons why we scheduled it there. In fact, each of the last 2 years, Florida and Kentucky have opened SEC play. I think it's safe to say we're probably not going to have them open SEC play this year. But the point is, you want to create some interest, and then it has this kind of crescendo at the end of the season. That's what we saw last year. So it is a little bit of an art, and you want to be selective about where you insert some of those big games early, because you don't want to be too reckless about going head to head with a big NFL weekend or perhaps college football playoffs, some important dates there. So we're very strategic and data-driven in terms of where we place games, and we're particularly mindful, especially in the southeastern part of the United States, where there's such a passion for football. We have to be especially mindful about how we schedule high-profile basketball games when the football season is still ongoing.
Let me ask you this. How much is the league office involved / advise on the out of conference portion of the slate? And I'll just give you this preface of, I try my best to monitor everything. You can't keep track of 300 something, teams out of conference schedules, but it feels like this year more than ever coming up 2025, 2026, I have a document at home, and it's like a document at home. I have a document on my computer where it's like every single night. I think November 3rd is the first night. Florida, Arizona, and Vegas, BYU, Villanova, and Vegas. And then it's just basically every single night until Jan 1 when conference play starts, there are big games. And, you go through the list, Kentucky, Gonzaga, Kentucky, St. John's, Kentucky this, Arkansas we know is going to play Duke on Thanksgiving Day. How much does the league office get involved in that, or is that a school by school? I mean, obviously we have the ACC-SEC challenge, which I do want to ask you specifically about in a minute, but do you guys get involved, or is it kind of on a school by school? I just know there's like a ton of great games. Again, Florida, Arizona, night 1. Night 2 is Duke, Texas, which obviously has an SEC feel. So how much do you guys get involved, or is that totally a school by school kind of deal?
Well, it reminds me of, the political concept of hard power and soft power.
Sure.
And that those may not be the best word choices because ultimately I view my role at the conference office as it's really a servant oriented role. But back to the terms, hard power and soft power. So we at the conference office have the formal responsibility to set the SEC schedule. And so that's a hard power, if you will, for lack of
That's
better.
the conference schedule. Yeah, yeah.
That's the conference schedule. On the soft power side, where you're trying to lead through persuasion, education, you don't have hard power, is on the non-conference schedule. And one of the unique features, and I spent 7.5 years at the NBA league office before coming to college basketball, and the NBA is this perfectly centralized ecosystem where the NBA schedules every regular season game, and then obviously the playoffs unfold from there. College basketball is unique in the sense that you have a significant portion of your schedule where the schools, determine which opponents they're going to play. And so that's where the soft power comes in. And what we try to do is educate our schools on broader considerations that we want them to keep in mind when they're thinking about building their schedule. And those are both fan-related considerations and also competitive considerations. And the competitive considerations, as you can imagine, center around what does it look like to build a resume that optimizes your chance as a particular program to get into the NCAA tournament. And our schools obviously did a pretty good job of that last year. We got 14 of 16 in the tournament. And we also talked to our schools about what does it mean to build a non-conference schedule that is going to be attractive to your fans and help grow college basketball. And I am very open with our coaches about what's happening in the broader sports ecosystem and the broader sports calendar. And I think that any decision maker in basketball, college or pro at this point in time, has to be very mindful of the enormous popularity of the NFL and college football. From a rating standpoint, those are the first and second most popular sports to watch in the United States in terms of TV viewership. And you have to be mindful of the evolution and placement of the football season when thinking about when you're going to schedule basketball games. And so we talk to our coaches about that. We also talk to coaches about the fact that, I have three coaches who have been in our league, Hall of Fame type coaches, John Calipari, Bruce Pearl, and Rick Barnes. And I always, use them as examples. When they started coaching and many years thereafter, football season ended on or around January 1st. And then college basketball had the next 10 or 11 weeks to itself to build up excitement for March Madness. That's no longer the case. So you can't just sit around and wait for football season to end to then get 6 weeks when you used to get 11 or 12 weeks. So we talk about what do we need to do to create some excitement earlier in the season, not to suggest that we're going to win head-to-head matchups against a college football game or an NFL game on a standalone basis, but can we do something to get our basketball fans or college basketball fans in general more excited about basketball a little bit earlier in the season than they might otherwise? So that's one of the driving considerations that actually led. I also have the opportunity to serve on the men's basketball oversight committee. And one of the rule changes that I'm really proud that we've implemented in the
Can
last
I guess
year
which one it is?
next year is the
exhibitions.
The exhibition
Oh,
game.
now you're stealing my notes because that was my next question.
So we are going to have some enormously exciting exhibition games, not only in the SEC, but around the country. And the rationale for that was we have to do something to get college basketball fans excited about college basketball season earlier than they would otherwise. So this year we're going to have, exhibition games like Kentucky versus Purdue. These are matchups that under the prior rule set when you had to have some charitable component. They didn't exist to the same degree that they are now. So that's a win for college basketball. You're going to have more people talking about and thinking about college basketball beginning in mid-October than ever before. And that's really important when you're losing some previously dedicated calendar space on the back end. Then transitioning into the regular season, I think coaches And I think the SEC has led the charge in this respect. They are willing to schedule high-profile non-conference games for two reasons, in my view. One, because they recognize it's good for the sport. And two, because the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee, largely through the net ranking, has developed a system where teams are actually rewarded and therefore incentivized to play those big games, as opposed to a bunch of bye games where it's a 40-point blowout and nobody wants to watch them. So you look at the college basketball system for selecting and seeding the NCAA tournament, you're not penalized for a loss as long as it's a high quality quad one loss. And so you see more teams playing high profile non-conference games. And I think the SEC, Nate Oates gets a reputation for being the most aggressive non-conference schedule out there. Kentucky, Tennessee have similarly played really daunting non-conference schedules in recent years. Auburn may have one-upped everybody last year when you look at their non-conference schedule, and that was so central to their momentum. And they really became the story of college basketball last season in many ways because of
No doubt.
all the games they won in non-conference play. So I credit SEC coaches for really taking the lead here, and I think it's spread to other conferences. And ultimately, the beneficiaries of those scheduling dynamics are fans, because fans are going to have some really good college basketball games to watch beginning in mid-October, all the way through the start of conference play.
So, dumb question. Is it a symbiotic relationship where, I mean, I assume, Purdue's at Rupp Arena this year. I assume you guys are going to blow it out as much as you can for an exhibition game. I mean, that's not something that's just, you're going to, I'm guessing I'm not going to need to put a hanger into the TV to pick up a signal somewhere to catch that one. So I'm guessing it's just, it's good for everybody, but I feel like not only getting Kentucky ready for the season, not only getting Purdue ready for the season, but whatever the TV partners are. If the game was at Purdue, I'm sure that, Purdue and the Big Ten would have a plan for how to maximize that. And I would assume it's the same, not only for out-of-conference games, not only for in-conference games, but now for the exhibitions as well.
Not ready to make any announcements in terms of TV time or window for that Kentucky-Purdue exhibition game.
It's October 24th.
I
already got the night
to
cleared.
Maximize the exposure and reach of that game.
I already told my wife,
You want to talk about blowing it out, Aaron? That game is at Rupp Friday night before the Kentucky-Tennessee football game the following day.
Ooh.
What an electric weekend that will be in Lexington, Kentucky. And then the following Thursday, Kentucky hosts Georgetown for another high-profile exhibition game.
I know. No, I listen, I got October. It sounds crazy. I'm not even being sarcastic. I have October 24th on the calendar because I was doing something. It's funny. We're recording here a few days before the NBA draft, and I only bring it up because I started looking ahead to the 2026 NBA draft and prospect, and it's like there are so many good players in college basketball next year. There's so many good games. I'm so excited. So, only other question scheduling wise I was going to ask, ACC-SEC challenge. I don't know how much that it's a joint effort by the league offices. I don't know if ESPN picks the games. I don't know how much you can share. But we got a couple doozies that are official. They came out last week as we're recording. Carolina at Kentucky, which obviously is another game at Rupp Arena everybody's fired up about. I know how excited Arkansas fans are about Louisville coming to town. I know how excited college basketball fans are about Florida going to play those defending champion, the defending champion Florida Gators going to Cameron Indoor Arena. There's other games too. I don't want to diminish anybody. Will Wade going to Auburn with NC State. But how does that process come together? Because I think that's now become a pretty big part of the college basketball calendar. And I told you this off air, but I was at the Duke Arkansas game 2 years ago. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to see you survived because it was the first court storming that I was ever a part of. And, it was scary there for a minute in Bud Walton Arena, but it was one of the great atmospheres I've ever been part of. And I'd just be curious how that process comes together as well.
Well, a couple points, and I'm going to be very transparent about the scheduling process for the challenge, but I'm glad you mentioned that Louisville, Arkansas game in the challenge. We're really bullish on Arkansas this coming season, and that's reflected in our scheduling decisions. We talked about Arkansas, their discretionary two-play opponent is Auburn. Obviously, Auburn's been one of the best teams in the SEC in recent years. I think it's fair to describe Arkansas's challenge opponent as a top 2 or 3 matchup in the ACC and Louisville. I think from a rating standpoint, Louisville's probably top 1 or 2 in the ACC. You factor in Carolina's tradition, and so you'd say Louisville is, a top 2 or 3 draw in terms of Arkansas getting them in the challenge. And then when the full schedule is released later this summer, you're going to see a lot of Arkansas games and premier TV windows. So we're very bullish on Arkansas, and I want to make that point clear, especially given some of the other topics we discussed at the top in terms of the decision to have Kentucky and Florida play this year, as opposed to where you suggested, many of my friends suggested that maybe we should feature, Arkansas and Kentucky twice because of the history with Coach Calipari. So we're really bullish on Arkansas. I think it's important to note that. With respect to the ACC-SEC challenge, as you can imagine, it's a 3-party process because you have 2 conferences and then ESPN, which is our broadcast partner for the challenge. So ultimately, when you have 2 conferences involved, you need a neutral arbiter to finalize the picks. So it's only fair that ESPN has the final say on the picks. But ESPN does an excellent job of consulting with my counterpart at the ACC, Paul Brazo, and myself to make sure that we land in the place that everybody's comfortable with. And so you mentioned some of the high-profile matchups in the challenge: Florida at Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky, Louisville at Arkansas, NC State at Auburn, Tennessee at Syracuse, Clemson at Alabama. There'll be some great matchups this year in the challenge. In terms of the way that we think about it on the SEC side, recognizing again that ESPN has the final say as that neutral arbiter, so to speak, is there have been 3 years of the challenge. We've played 2 years thus far, then we've scheduled games for the third. And if you look at the distribution of opponents through the first 3 years of the challenge, 6 SEC schools have been assigned to play either Duke or North Carolina. And no SEC school has played Duke or North Carolina more than once. And that approach reflects our effort to spread big games around, given the depth of our conference, and rewarding the various SEC schools that have invested in basketball and seen that pay off with their success in the postseason. And also, we use it as a way to reward the most deserving teams. And so if you look at those same 6 schools that over the course of a 3-year period have been given very high-profile opponents in the challenge, during the same period of time, all 6 of those schools have been to the Sweet 16, 4 of them have been to the Elite 8, and 3 of them have been to the Final Four. So it's a way to not only create fan interest by optimizing matchups that everybody wants to see, but also we want to be a meritocracy in the SEC, and so rewarding those schools that have gone out and proven it on the court. And so this is year 3 of the challenge. I think from top to bottom, this is the deepest slate of high-quality matchups that we've had to date.
I'm going to put you on the spot. You can plead the 5th if you want. Is there an intention to continue to spread out Carolina and Duke amongst all the schools? And the only reason I ask, Big Blue Nation thinks that Duke is ducking them, because I got that a lot when I saw the schedule come out. Oh, Duke doesn't want this smoke. I don't want to put you on the spot here. I'm not asking you to break any news, but is there going to be a continued effort? Listen, it all makes sense. They're 2 great programs, 2 very high-profile programs. Everybody wants them either coming into their building or, of course, it's a historic thing to go to their buildings as well. I mean, I have a buddy who's a Florida fan who's already planning his trip to Cameron Indoor. Will that be a continued effort to kind of, when possible, branch out those schools? Because, like I said, there's some you read stuff on the internet, you don't know what's true and what's not. But Big Blue Nation thinks that Duke is ducking them in this challenge.
Well, that's why I think it's really important for people in my position to come on shows like yours, Aaron, and be transparent with fans. Because I grew up a fan. I'm not someone that had, inside connections to the sports industry. I'm someone who's just tried to work my way up and go about my work in an honorable fashion. And so I think it's important for fans to hear directly from me. And also acknowledge where, maybe I don't want to say we screwed some things up last year, because I spent some time detailing why Kentucky and Florida only played once last year. It's the first time that happened in 60 years. So there's a reason for that, but also we accept the criticism from fans and we try to get it right as best as we can, given the other constraints that we have to operate under as a conference. So I think transparency is really important. To answer your question directly about Duke versus Kentucky in the challenge, and that matchup, to be clear, through the first 3 years of the challenge has not occurred. I would say the biggest reason for that is because Kentucky and Duke do play each other on a rotational basis as a part of the Champions Classic.
Makes sense.
And I was actually at that game last year. It happened to be in Atlanta. It was the first big game of Mark Pope's career, and they beat a very good Duke team. And you talk about some of those big non-conference wins that helped catapult the SEC to the best season statistically of any conference in history. Well, certainly Kentucky's win over Duke in November was a big part of that. So college basketball fans, not on an annual basis, but they have been fortunate enough to see Duke, Kentucky on a somewhat regular basis. Kentucky and North Carolina do play each other in some of those showcase games from time to time, but this will mark the first time since 2014 that North Carolina has been at Rupp Arena.
Yep.
So it hasn't happened as Kentucky has played Duke, specifically last year, more recently than has played North Carolina. And so that does factor into some of our scheduling decisions. Now, there was another part to your question, and that is, will the SEC continue to spread around Duke and North Carolina beyond the 6 schools that have already played one or the other through the first 3 years of the challenge? And my answer to that question, Aaron, is it depends. We aim to be a meritocracy. And when I met with our coaches for 2 days at spring meetings, that was a big point of emphasis in my discussions with them. And we are very transparent. You know, not only do I try to be transparent with influential people in the media like you to help message to fans, but I'm even more transparent with our coaches because there's some things I can share with our coaches that I can't share on podcasts. And we lay out the data. And we lay out the data we look at to make scheduling decisions. We lay out the formulas that we use to make scheduling decisions so that coaches can see for their own eyes why we land where we do on our schedule, on decisions like the ACC-SEC challenge and so forth. And so if we have a school beyond the 6 that I just mentioned that steps up this year and earns their way to a Final Four, they're going to be rewarded with high-profile games next year. But the answer is it depends. And what I can pledge to you, Aaron, and to our fans, is that we're going to operate as a meritocracy. We're going to be transparent. We're going to try to prioritize big games and traditional rivalries, but we're also going to try to prioritize fairness within each season and from one year to the next.
Well, you said you felt like you messed up. I don't know. Auburn Duke was like one of the best games we got all season long. Clemson, Kentucky, I know it didn't work out on the SEC side, but was a great game. So no, it's been a really cool event to kind of see unfold the last couple of years. And yeah, we'll see. I haven't been to Rupp in about 7 or 8 years. So, I got to make a return, but there's too many good games this year. I mean, I don't even know, do I go for Carolina? Do I go for the exhibition against Purdue? Do I go for some of the in-conference? Florida's now coming back. So, we'll see. So anyway.
Well, the spirit of my comment in that respect is working, and I've been doing league office work for about a decade, 7.5 years in the NBA, now coming up on my 2-year anniversary at the NBA. To do this job well, you truly have to approach it with a servant's heart, because you're serving your schools, you're serving the fans, and then you also have to approach it with humility, because you have to learn as you go. And, I mentioned Florida, Kentucky, and Alabama, Tennessee last year. It hurt me to know that those teams were only playing once, and we were breaking a 60-year streak. For 60 consecutive years, fans at both of those institutions got to see the opposing institution come into their building and play a conference game. And so it hurt me to break those streaks. The fan outcry was understood. again, I understand, and hopefully your listeners have a better understanding as to how we got to that outcome in the first place, given the scheduling parameters that we're under and the size of the conference that has increased in recent years. But it still hurts, and you try to live and learn and adjust and get better, and also even things out over time. One thing that I share with our coaches on a regular basis is there will be seasons where you look at your schedule and there's certain aspects of the schedule that may be frustrating to you. And the same is true for fan bases. But if you give it some time and let things, kind of space out over the course of a couple, 3 seasons or beyond, you're going to see that our conference works really hard to achieve fairness for all 16 of our schools.
Garth Glissman, man, I thought we were going to talk for a few minutes here. I don't know exactly what time we start. I think we're closing in on like 40 plus minutes of SEC basketball league office talk. So with the opponents out today, I'm glad. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you for not only sharing your insight, but just making the time, making people smarter about how this whole process works. Now, the big question, schedule's out. Do you get to relax for a few weeks? Do you get to go to a beach? Or, College World Series is going on. We got football media days coming up in like 2 weeks. When do you get a vacation?
I'm not very good at taking vacations. I know you're a reporter, so you could corroborate that with my wife if you'd like. I will tell you that seeing Florida win the national championship and being on that floor and just watching Florida celebrate was really inspiring in the sense that I got back to Birmingham the next day and it was full speed ahead for next season. And you realize how special those moments are. And it's ultimately our teams, players, and coaches that go out and win conference and national championships. From the conference office standpoint, I talked about having a servant's heart and doing it with humility. We don't go out and win games and championships, but we want to make sure that we do our part to lay the foundation and create a structure where our teams can rise to the top. And seeing Florida do that last year was incredibly motivating for me. And it's been full speed ahead ever since. So there haven't been many days off. Hopefully I'll find some time to sneak down to the beach. I'm from the Midwest. I didn't grow up next to any large bodies of water, but I'm learning down here in the South that you got to get down to the Gulf. So I'm trying to be a good Southerner, and I'll take my wife and kids down for a few days at the beach this summer. But otherwise, it's full speed ahead, trying to continue this incredible momentum for SEC men's basketball.
A lot of momentum. I love college football, as you said. Everyone loves the NFL and college football, but I'm not being sarcastic when I say I have October 24th, first time I can ever remember knowing the date of an exhibition in June. And then, like I said, I have a list of just all these big games and all over the country. And I think I'll be at the Florida Arizona game. So I don't know if you'll be swinging out to Vegas for the season opener. So we might have to link up.
I think we're going to cross paths, probably a few different places.
Okay. All right. Well, Garth Glissman, SEC office, thank you for the time. Thank you for the knowledge. And, next year when everybody gets mad, we'll pencil you in for June of 2026 for when somebody's going to be mad. So we'll get you, at that point to clarify some things then. But thank you so much for the time. We'll speak again soon. Okay.
Thanks, Aaron.